Theater, like all entertainment, is very often a reflection of real life, but always with the mundane cut out, or you would win an Academy Award for standing in line for 2 hours at the Home Depot. The Bugatti EB110 is 100% unadulterated, Tony Award-winning theater. On the comedy side, it was the world's first all-carbon supercar. It was the fastest car on the planet, and it was presented to the public in a 2-day-long, two-country extravaganza so opulently exorbitant it would have bankrupted Ferrari. However, just a few short years later, comedy turned into tragedy when it all went down in flames, with actual tears, a suspicious bankruptcy, and soap opera-worthy accusations of bribery and extortion. Plus, the realization that the whole thing had likely been financed by its own main competition, plus Suzuki. Stay tuned for the high-drama theatrical story of the fascinating Bugatti EB110. This episode of Revelations is brought to you by the Haggerty Drivers Club, which includes a subscription to our award-winning magazine, 24/7 flatbed roadside assistance, and far more. Join or get more info at the link below. The legendary French brand Bugatti started making cars in the early 1900s, and within no time it had racked up literal thousands of major race wins. Bugatti was untouchable. Ettore Bugatti believed that racing was a great way to showcase his car's abilities, but he wasn't a racer. He was a perfectionist. And a half. In fact, had the term obsessive-compulsive disorder existed while he was alive, he would have insisted that it be renamed CDO, because CDO is OCD in alphabetical order, as it should be. Monsieur Bugatti's cars reflected Monsieur Bugatti's CDO. Not only were they engineering masterpieces, but every single part was a work of art, from the engine-turned metal firewalls to the perfectly crafted cam boxes. The cars weren't the only sculptures. So too were the machines that made the cars, many of which were designed by Monsieur Bugatti, as were most of the things in the factory, including the silverware, because those other people's implements, well, never good enough. Bugatti even made his own electricity to power the factory and the electric car he designed for himself when the power company had the gall to tell him he was late with a payment. You're getting the picture, right? Let's just call a spade a spade. The man was nuts. Or maybe he was just French. It's kind of hard to tell. Ha ha, poisson! Actually, he wasn't even French, he was just nuts. Ettore was born to an Italian family in Italy, a fact that he referred to as, quote, that accident. But little did he know that 40 years after his death, his company would be resurrected in Italy. And that script started with a bit player named Ferruccio Lamborghini. Perhaps you've heard of him. He was mulling the idea of creating a new Italian supercar about 10 years after he'd sold his own company. Together with a French writer and his old friend, the engineer responsible for the Mura and Countach, they contemplated calling the new car company Ferla, or just Ferruccio, since Ferruccio couldn't use the name Lamborghini. Things got serious when they brought in a bunch of Italian supercar superstars, and then a man named Romano Artioli. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he was the man behind the Lotus Elise, but that hadn't quite happened yet. At the time, Artioli was the Southern European distributor for Suzuki and had the largest Ferrari dealership in the world, and he suggested that the new car be sold as a Bugatti. Ferruccio eventually lost interest, but through equal parts luck, charm, and sleight of hand, Artioli managed to pry that French national treasure away from France. And so suddenly, Bugatti was back. And Italian. And it was relocated to Campogalliano, a small town biking distance from Ferrari, Maserati, and Lamborghini. This meant Artioli had access to the dream team of engineers who had created every poster-worthy Italian supercar of the previous 20 years. The Dream Team set out startup style to build the best supercar in the world. At the same time, Artioli spent more than $70 million building the best Bugatti factory in the world. Even the storm drain grates had the EB logo on them. And no, this time they didn't build a new power plant to power the factory, but the air conditioning was powered by energy recovered from the dynos when breaking in the V-12 engines. Bugatti, indeed. And it gets better. The ceiling design of the rotunda was inspired by the wheel of a Bugatti Type 59, with windows to provide soft light for the designer's drawing boards. It then had rows of electric lights that would automatically adjust to vary with the intensity and path of the sunlight coming in through those windows. The factory was so distracting to motorists on the highway next to it that the roadway had to be artificially banked to stop people from crashing while staring at it. On the day that would have been Ettore Bugatti's 109th birthday, the new factory was inaugurated in a ceremony that genuinely could have won an Oscar for the most dramatic performance of the century. To symbolize the passing of the flame between the old factory in Molsheim, France, and the new factory in Campogalliano, Italy, Bugatti decided to bypass the idea of a symbolic gesture and go straight for a literal one. They had the youngest employee working at the Molsheim factory light a flame and place it into an ornate engine-turned case mounted to the front of a Bugatti Galibier. Together in a flotilla of 77 classic Bugattis, that flame was driven to Campogalliano, 400 miles away, where the youngest employee of the new Bugatti company used it to light a torch at the factory, which the Archbishop of Modena then blessed. This is the kind of high camp, over-the-top performance that could out-drama an entire graduating class of theater majors on ayahuasca. That was laced with MDMA. And that was just the factory. Things get even more over the top when we're talking about the car. Bugatti decanted the used oil from the first EB110 engines that ran into little flasks resembling Aceto Balsamico di Modena and gave them out as gifts to engineers and friends. We're painting a picture here, folks. The new Bugatti V12 wasn't just assembled in Campogalliano, it was created there. Even the block was cast in-house, because that is how you build a Bugatti engine. The Bugatti V12 never needs a belt service because it has no timing belt. It also has no timing chain. Its 4 camshafts are gear-driven, something you won't ever see outside of racing. It had 12 independent throttle bodies feeding 5 valves per cylinder, a design licensed from Yamaha. It had an entirely conventional cylinder bore of 81 millimeters, but a piston stroke of just 56.6. That's a shorter stroke than Ferrari's 1.5-liter Formula One V12, and likely the shortest stroke of any production car engine ever, K-cars included. And there was a cool reason for it. The engine and transmission were one unit, with the transmission mainshaft in the center of the car, in the same tiny little case, literally inches away from and parallel to the engine's crankshaft. A long stroke would have resulted in longer throws, pushing the transmission further away and locating the engine even further off-center to the left. The compression ratio was an ultra-low 7.5 to 1, and combined with that tiny piston stroke and just 3.5 liters of displacement, this thing is absolutely positively dead off boost. But at 5,000 RPM, when the boost finally hits, it turns into a monster and pulls all the way to its 8,600 RPM redline. In true drama form, it's all or nothing. EB110 GTs made 553 horsepower. The later SS model made 603. and was enough piss and vinegar to make the EB110 the quickest and fastest car in the world. A record that stood for all of 3 months before it was beaten by the McLaren F1. But for its debut, the McLaren F1 was unceremoniously plunked down in a drizzly parking lot in Monaco with a bunch of journalists asking questions. When it came time to show the new Bugatti to the world, Artioli and company put on a festival of thespian histrionics so lavish that Autocar magazine said it would have made a royal event at Windsor Castle look like a garden party by comparison. Once again, the date was chosen to celebrate Ettore Bugatti's birthday, this time his 110th, in case you're wondering where the name EB110 came from. The 2-day-long launch event kicked off at Paris La Défense with more than 5,000 invited guests to witness hours of speeches and, of course, a brunch. There were 70 vintage Bugattis arranged in the horseshoe shape of the classic Bugatti grille. Any sort of commercial advertising was forbidden in the Esplanade, but flowers were not. So Artioli's wife, who was responsible for an entire line of Bugatti-branded merch, had a gargantuan floral arrangement made out of roses in the shape of the Bugatti logo. Ha! Take that, Gordon Murray, with your piece of merde McLaren F1. This is how you do a spectacle. It was absolutely miserable, according to Robert Cumberford from Automobile Magazine, who was there, and said the speeches were interminable and of no interest. And worse, they were in French, with no interpreters available. But hey, the whole thing made for great publicity photos. Especially when it ended, and the EB110 was joined by a 50-bike motorcade of police, 2 prototypes, and a sea of vintage Bugattis, all in the midst of a complete Parisian traffic nightmare fighting to get to the Arc de Triomphe. And we're not even close to the end yet. That evening, 1,700 people joined for a sit-down, formal dinner at the Chateau of Versailles, drinking Bugatti-branded champagne while Signore Artioli and his wife danced the first dance of the evening. It was a waltz, in case you wanted to know. It was like an Indian royal wedding, only far more expensive. Meanwhile, the car was already in a truck on its way to Molsheim, 300 miles away, because the next morning, on the actual day of Ettore's 110th birthday, it would be put on display for the public to see, in town, and then at the Chateau Saint-Jean, the small castle that Ettore had used to entertain his guests, and to spy on their table manners to decide whether they were worthy of his car. Don't worry, Artioli's Bugatti also had a selection committee charged with doing the same, though specifically they were weeding out speculators and trying to make sure that real drivers bought the EB110. One German even made it through the screening process. His name was Michael Schumacher, maybe you've heard of him, and he took very public delivery of his EB110 SS. But then very privately crashed it. Somehow that never made it into the newspapers. Must have been driver error. We all know that man can't drive. And besides, nobody else complained about the EB110's handling. In fact, the SS made it around the Nürburgring in 7 minutes and 47 seconds. That's just a couple seconds slower than the Veyron managed 12 years later. It pulled a world record .99 G on the skid pad as tested by Road & Track, and its handling was universally praised with neutral behavior under power because unlike other period all-wheel drive systems, it sent 73% of the power to the back. It rode better than any other supercar. It had wonderfully communicative steering. It was a dynamic masterpiece, perfect even. Until you got in. It is very 1990s in here. And this is the part of the program where we go from comedy to tragedy. Along the way, though, we need to stop at irony. Bugatti took the time to cast the engine block in its own factory, to say nothing of having its own logo on the porcelain dishes in the cafeteria, because nothing less would do for a car wearing a Bugatti badge. And yet, sitting here in the expensive seat, I am looking directly at a Nardi badge. And a Nakamichi badge. And I spy 1970s Fiat Group dash vents that are not fooling me with an EB logo on them, to say nothing of the Poltrona Frau branding right on the seat. Then there were the BBS wheels, ANSA exhaust, Weber fuel injection. There were logos everywhere. Look, this isn't that uncommon, but the Bugatti was supposed to be different. Was there more marketing here than substance? Well, there sure was a lot of substance. This thing weighs just under 4,000 pounds. And by the way, it's only as long as a GR Corolla. That's a lot of weight today, but back then, this was an astronomically heavy car, and certainly against Ettore Bugatti's mantra that weight is the enemy. Which sounds like Lotus founder Colin Chapman, whose famous formula for success was simplify and add lightness. Of course, Romano Artioli purchased Lotus while he owned Bugatti, and he envisioned a worldwide network of Lotus Bugatti dealers, a sports car manufacturer with those two brands as bookends. The Lotus side worked out for a while, but Bugatti was in for a rough ride from the start. The EB110 was a hell of an automobile, but the theater surrounding the company just turned to tragedy. The likely culprit was really just timing. Calendar, not cam. That was done by Gears, don't forget. Perhaps Artioli should have taken it as an omen that 5 days after the formation of Bugatti Automobili SPA was Black Monday.
Well, panic is the only way to describe what happened on Wall Street today.
The massive stock market crash that led to a worldwide recession. The EB110 likely would have done a lot better if it was an EB105. Ettore's 110th birthday was just a bad time to launch a new supercar, with a worldwide recession that just destroyed exotic car sales. Bugatti wanted to sell 150 of these a year, and yet wound up producing only about 115 over 3 years of production. However, that explanation is far too rational for a melodrama like this. Artioli insists the company went bust with a full book of orders because a certain competitor threatened Bugatti's suppliers to stop sending parts, and even paid off his employees to mess up the cars. If you ask others, it's because Bugatti didn't pay its bills. Suzuki probably had an inadvertent part in the failure of Bugatti. It canceled Artioli's distributorship, as one of the Dream Team alleges, because Artioli pissed them off in another deal. If you could ask Ettore Bugatti directly, he'd probably just blame it all on Italy. Maybe it wasn't his Italian birth that was a mistake. Maybe it was the Italian renaissance of his company. But that produced one hell of a roller coaster. Remember, we're looking for the highs and the lows here, never the mundane. And the Bugatti EB110 was anything but mundane.